decades of brutality due to racism. And let's also think about other factors in the way that we as social workers assess trauma, right? There's frequency. The repeated nature of an event makes it more traumatic. Then there's a relationship between the victim and the perpetrator. A violation from someone who was once loved, who was once trusted, is far more traumatic. Then there's the public nature of the event, right? A public humiliation is more traumatic, especially if no one intervened to help you. And then in the aftermath, whether or not we're believed, that has an impact. So if the first person that you tell after an event doesn't believe you, then you're re-traumatized. If later you take that to the authorities and you report it and they don't believe you, then you're re-traumatized. So adding this critical race lens when we're looking at trauma, when we assess trauma, is very important. Here, I call this the health inequities trajectory, and it's really looking at how does discrimination impact so many aspects of our lives and how it impacts the healthcare system. So at the top is socioeconomic status, which we talked about, right? If you feel that you're excluded or you didn't get that promotion due to racism or any kind of discrimination, that has an impact on your health. Then we're looking at environmental exposure. If you live in a community that's over-policed, or you're living, like I shared earlier, in the north with very few resources, then your health is impacted. And all of this chronic stress has an impact on our health, but also can lead to unhealthy coping mechanisms, like turning to drugs and alcohol. And then discrimination can also be a barrier actually in the healthcare system. It can prevent you from accessing screening and testing. You'll recall a incident that happened in Manitoba several years ago. It was an Indigenous gentleman. He had gone to the emergency room and he had complained pain, but in the ER they said, "Oh no, you're drunk, sleep it off," and they left him in the ER. I think he was in the ER for over 30 hours, and he passed away. And what he actually had was a urinary tract infection, which is completely treatable, right? But in that instance, those implicit assumptions about that person completely changed their healthcare trajectory. And that's the piece I really want us to think about too. So when we think about implicit assumptions, we all carry them, right? We don't live on an island. We live in this society with misperceptions, stigma, discrimination, it all exists. And I think when we think about implicit assumptions, it's easy to say, oh, that profession has an issue with it. The police have an issue with bias. We as social workers don't, right? And I think it's really important to check ourselves, right? We all have implicit assumptions. And it takes a lot of energy and courage to unlearn some of this. Several years ago, I took this test. Perhaps some of you are familiar with it. It's called the implicit association test. I see some nodding. Harvard has put it out, and it's completely free. It's available online. I encourage you to check it out. And even for me, as someone who's done equity work, anti-racism work for a long time, I took this test and I was surprised by the results, because these are implicit assumptions are just that, things that happen in seconds, right? That we have to actively fight against and actively work to unlearn. Several years ago, I was very fortunate to be part of this project at the Mental Health Commission of Canada, and it's called Building the Case to Improve Mental Health Services for Immigrants, Refugees, Ethnocultural, and Racialized Populations. And what this project did was look at the noted barriers in the healthcare system for racialized groups. And service accessibility was a big one. Provider-patient interaction, again, thinking about those implicit assumptions, circumstantial challenges, access to social determinants, language barriers, stigma, and fear. So in order to have positive mental health, again, the home, the job, and the friend, we're really talking about social inclusion, freedom from discrimination and violence, and access to economic resources. So how do we embed principles of equity into our work? Easier said than done, right? I'm sure you've all seen this image before. I love this image because it differentiates what is equality from equity, right? Equity is not about treating everybody the same, but it's about treating people according to their unique needs. So in the very first one, everyone's treated the same, right? And you see the taller person, they have no barriers in watching the baseball game. The middle person's okay too, but the short person, their barrier is still there. In the next image, you have everyone being accommodated based on their needs. So now, again, the accommodation for the middle person and the short person, now all of them can see above the barrier. And the third picture is where the barrier is removed, so nobody needs accommodation. And that's what we're really talking about when we're thinking about structural barriers. How do we remove the barrier so that we don't have to accommodate? And how do we support people that do need accommodation? At CMHA, we've done a lot of work in equity over the last, I'd say, good 5 years. And we developed an equity action framework, and I really encourage you to check it out. It's available free online. The link is there. And what we're really focusing on is how do you embed equity into service delivery and planning? How do you improve the evidence base for equity issues in mental health? How do you tackle the social determinants, challenge discrimination, and foster meaningful participation of people with lived experience? So I want to offer you a few tips that at the service delivery level, at the organizational level, and then at the provincial level as well. So embedding equity into service delivery, again, it's about asking about experiences of discrimination and validating that experience when the client shares it with you. And like we all know, it's about using a trauma-informed approach and not forgetting to use that critical race lens when we're doing the trauma-informed approach. In terms of tackling social determinants, it's using evidence-based assessment tools like the Ontario Common Assessment of Need. Anyone use the OCAN here? Yeah, a few? That's great. It's not a perfect tool, but it is what we have, the best tool we have that actually asks clients about their sociodemographics and also their social determinants health needs. And there's also a portion that's filled out by the provider and the client, and it actually is a way of measuring unmet need of the client. And then we have, how do we do this in terms of challenging discrimination and fostering participation of people with lived experience? Using a recovery-based approach. And well, how do you do that? That's very practical. The Wellness Recovery Action Plan is a very practical tool. Anyone heard of the RAP? Yeah, a few people? Awesome. So the RAP is actually an advanced directive. It functions like an advanced directive. So the client can plan for periods of illness when they are well. So it can be anything from, here's where to find my meds. Here's a person that I need to support me when I'm ill. Here's where I'd like to go. Here are the things that you can say to me to help me feel grounded. And these wraps are great. They come in little cards. The client can carry them around with them as well. And I really encourage you to check it out because this is a really effective tool in terms of supporting clients with their self-determination. Now we're looking at the organizational level. Providing staff with training about a range of equity-related topics. This is really important, right? We can't just rely on the knowledge that we gained in social work school because things are always changing and shifting and growing. So constant education is so important. Conducting community-based needs assessments is really important. We do needs assessments with clients, but what about the community, right? Do we know if our organization, if the surroundings have changed? Is there an influx of recent immigrants into our neighborhood? And how do we support that at a more organizational level? And in terms of challenging discrimination and fostering meaningful participation, actually hiring people from marginalized communities into programs. So if you're running a trans health program, you gotta have a trans person on your staff. If you're running a mental health program for South Asian women, you have to have a South Asian woman on staff because that lived experience is so important. And I think we know this about mental health and addictions programming too, right? You have to have peers. people who've lived through the trauma of mental health and addictions issues. Because that peer is going to be able to reach your client in a way that you never will be able to as a therapist. And then at the policy level, I think this is sometimes the most challenging. It's about using tools such as the Health Equity Impact Assessment tool. Anyone use the HEIA tool here? This is an excellent tool that was developed by the Ministry of Health probably close to a decade ago. And it's a decision support tool. So if you're thinking at a regional level or even at an organizational level about making a change, perhaps you want to change the hours that your program is being provided, this tool will actually walk you through what are some unintended negative consequences that might result of your policy decision. And the tool actually names some populations that are extremely marginalized so that you can think through what might be the unintended negative consequence of my policy decision and how can we mitigate that unintended negative consequence. The next is to adopt the health in all policies approach. And this at the policy level is so important because this means that looking at economic policy and justice policy with a health lens to see what are the unintended negative outcomes on our health as a result of this policy. I think a big one that we're all going to be faced with is cannabis legalization. It's coming up July 1st, right? There are great criminal justice reasons to do it, right? We're not criminalizing people for possession. There is great economic reasons to do it, right? There are tax revenues. Think what we as a society can do with that tax revenue. But what are the health outcomes, right? And what are the impacts? Those are unknown. So thinking about a big policy decision in terms of a health in all policies approach is very important. And then when we think at a policy level, it's really important to create opportunities for people with lived experience that are meaningful at a policy level. So, it's not about having one person sit on a panel, but it's more about how do you garner their input? Are you doing focus groups in the community before you make a final policy decision? And then the piece that is so important is embedding and identifying performance indicators. Because if we as a society, if we as an organization are not setting targets and benchmarks, how will we know if we've achieved positive outcomes? So those targets and benchmarks are really important. I didn't go through everything, very text-heavy slides, but they're available online if you're really interested in learning more about the tools that are available. So the last thing I'm going to say and end with is, how do all these structural barriers impact us as social workers? We know that 1 in 3 Canadians will experience a mental health issue within their lifetime, and 500,000 people didn't go to work today because of a mental health issue. And we heard the stats from the workplace survey that Vanessa did earlier that actually showed over 30% of us have said that we are overworked. Right. And in terms of our own mental health, healthcare providers, we make the worst patients, right? Because we think we know it all and that it doesn't impact us. I'm not going to talk to you about vicarious trauma and PTSD. You know this stuff, right? But what I'm going to say is operational stress is a huge part of the package when it comes to being a social worker. And a lot of people think, operational stress injuries only happen if you're in combat, if you're a soldier who's gone off to war, or if you're a police officer or a correctional officer. That's not true. Operational stress happens to any one of us working in a service-related profession. It takes a lot of courage and strength to sit and listen to other people's trauma. And of course, we're going to absorb some of that trauma. So it's really important that we look after our own mental health as well. I just want to show a very quick 3-minute video about this.
I felt like sleeping whole day. I didn't feel like getting out of bed. Didn't feel like showering.
I was scattered. I was everywhere. My mind was everywhere but where it should have been.
Constant headaches, the mood swings, the chest pain, and just not being myself.
I got married, started a family right away. My father passed away. I was diagnosed with cancer. Was promoted to a job that I wasn't prepared to be able to do, but I took it anyway. And that starts taking a toll.
I cried all the time. I lost about 40 pounds.
I was very irritable, very angry, very tired, and couldn't concentrate. I couldn't remember what I had just read.
Got up in the morning, got dressed, drove around the block twice, went home, went to bed, cried.
It basically felt like my head was being split open. It was kind of graphic, but it felt like it was being split open and it was actually on fire.
Getting home from work after a long day, circling in the backyard with a drink in one hand and crying.
It was a battle to survive every day. It got to the point where breathing was an effort. I was angry. I would come home from work and my children, I have 5, were all trying to do the best they could do, but I would come in from work and if I saw a dish on the counter, I would blow it way out of proportion.
Began to isolate more. I'd go up to my bedroom and put the TV on when I got home from work and not go downstairs where the rest of the family were.
I know I love my children. I do. I love them with all my heart. But, you know, the younger one, he just needed so much attention that, you know, I feel like if I do touch him or I feel like if I, you know, go and play with him, you know, I will hurt him or, you know, that's how I felt at the time.
And I responded in behavior that was upsetting to other people. I know that they didn't like what they saw, which was someone who was angry, irritable, frustrated.
Just avoiding people. Didn't want to, and of course that's pretty crucial to what I do. But if I didn't have to talk to somebody on the phone or if I didn't have to meet with somebody.
If I admitted there was a problem within me, that was a sign of weakness. And God, if I'd show a sign of weakness, then it was the whole paranoia that somebody else would be able to take over what I had in terms of my responsibility.
Crying like non-stop and body becoming so weak and you are trembling, you feel like you are all confused. You don't know what is good and what is wrong.
My parents were completely concerned, and so were my friends, and my parents didn't know what to do.
I was scared. I was scared I was losing my mind. I was scared that, you know, people are going to judge me. I was scared that I was being an awful mother. You know, I was scared that, you know, they're going to take away my kids from me. So that's probably one of the reasons why I was so, I didn't want to tell anybody about what I was going through. I just wanted to do it by myself.
So those are real people. They weren't actors. That's a video we show all the time as part of our Mental Health Works program at CMHA. I think the piece that I want to leave with you is that it's so important. I think, you know, speaking today at the association, these are our colleagues, and these are the individuals that we need to look out for, right? And we're so good at being there for our clients, and how are we at being there for each other? And I think looking for the signs, especially at work, is so important because oftentimes mental health issues surface as performance issues in the workplace. So that person that was always coming to work on time, suddenly not coming to work on time. Or that person that always got their case files done on schedule, suddenly not submitting those on schedule. And, you know, we all have bad days, but if it's persistent over a 2-week period, that's the moment to have the conversation. And I think for us, sometimes it's more intimidating to have this conversation with our peers because, hey, we're the mental health experts, right? But one of the things that I learned that I've kept with, I learned in social work school from one of my profs, Dr. Kristen Trotter, and she said that you can only take your client as far as you've gone yourself. So going to therapy, getting help, it's important for our well-being, but it also makes us a better therapist and a better counselor. So I think for me, it's really important that we start to talk about it a little bit more in our profession. The Mental Health Commission, one of the greatest things the Commission has achieved for this country is to establish the psychological health and safety standard for the workplace. You've all heard of the Occupational Health and Safety Standard. Well, this is a Psychological Health and Safety Standard. It's a volunteer standard, but it has tools and resources, and it's a step-by-step guide on how do you establish a healthy work environment that promotes mental health. If you haven't checked it out, a link is here for you. And just a little plug for our program as well, Mental Health Works. We've been running this program through CMHA since, I believe, the year 2000. And what we do is we actually go into workplaces and support employers and managers and supervisors about how do you have this conversation around mental health, and how do you support people who do the tough job, the tough work in your organization. Because in any organization, your biggest asset are your staff. So how do you support your staff? If you're interested in learning more about it, the website is here for you. And again, a really great resource is Connects Ontario. Anyone heard of Connects Ontario? A few? Awesome. If you haven't heard of it before, please take out your pen and write this down. Connects has a 24-hour live, confidential, anonymous, and free hotline. It's a mental health support line anywhere in the province. They also have mental health services information, so you can call them up and say, I have a client, I need a resource in Lambton County. What do you have? And they'll let you know. It's also a great resource for us as social workers. It's 24-hour support. The person who's answering a call is well-educated like us, but this is really important so that we're not doing this alone. And my last note is, of course, recovery is possible, right? We say this to our clients all the time, recovery is possible. And it's important that we say to ourselves too, recovery is possible for us as well. And just to echo the financial presentation earlier, I wanted to leave us with some financials to think about, right? So the cost of mental health is $1.4 billion each year in cost to the healthcare system, the justice system, and the social services system. It costs $486 a day to keep a person in a psychiatric hospital. And it can cost up to $457 a day to keep someone in jail, but only $72 a day to house a person in the community with supports. It's something that we can't be silent about any longer. So thank you so much for your time. I'm happy to take any questions.
It gives me great pleasure to thank you for this thought-provoking and very, very timely presentation. You've done a magnificent job in highlighting the systemic barriers related to inequities created by racism and discrimination, the profound impact that social determinants have in compounding these inequities, the role that social workers can play by embedding equity in their practice related to service delivery, and also checking out our own implicit biases that we bring to work, the role of organizations in better understanding not only who they are serving and bringing the lived experience in, but also who are the people who are providing the services and the supports they need, and at the planning level, regionally and provincially, the work that needs to be done. And I saw various people jotting down, making notes and jotting down some of the websites and some of the important tools that you were highlighting as well. And self-care, and the importance of that, the importance of self-care that the work that needs to happen in organizations to create supportive environments that enables people to talk about and to get the supports they need, and then what social workers need to do themselves to take care of themselves. I think it's very interesting that within the insurance sector, we've recently heard that Great West Life, Manulife, a number of these large insurance agencies are increasing the access to benefits for their employees. So it's happening in certain sectors. It'll be interesting to see how long it takes to begin to trickle down to the service delivery sector. And the comment earlier spoke to that. Thank you so much. And this is simply a tour.